Welcome back to the swing state. In the span of the last 72 hours, a sitting U.S. senator who voted to convict Donald Trump for January 6th got bounced from his own party. A 7-term libertarian congressman who forced the release of the Epstein files got trumped by a guy the president openly called a warm body. And the most scandal-soaked attorney general in modern Texas history, a man impeached by his own party's state house, just got the official MAGA blessing for U.S. Senate. If you wanted a single week to understand what the Republican Party is in 2026, this was it. The price of admission isn't just conservatism, it isn't competence, it isn't even electability. It's loyalty. One man, one pledge, one purge. Welcome to the swing state. Today we'll be talking about 3 races. The first in Louisiana, then in Kentucky, and last in Texas. Hope you're ready for it. Starting off in Louisiana on Saturday, May 16, 2026, 2-term Republican Senator Bill Cassidy lost his bid for renomination in Louisiana's GOP Senate primary. He finished third with about 24.8% of the vote. Trump-endorsed Republican Julia Letlow led the field at roughly 44%. And State Treasurer John Fleming came in second at roughly around 28%. Letlow and Fleming advanced to a runoff on June 27th. Cassidy is the first Republican senator to lose renomination in nearly a decade. He was one of the 7 Senate Republicans who voted to convict Donald Trump in his second impeachment trial following the January 6, 2021. He has also publicly clashed with his Health Secretary, Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., over vaccine policy and voted against Trump's Surgeon General nominee, Cassie Means. So, Adarsh and Eric, let me know what you feel about this wonderful senator.
Yeah, well, I think if anyone had any premonition that the president didn't have control over the Republican Party, that can just be tossed out the window, because I am pretty shocked at actually how bad Bill Cassidy did in his primary. The fact that he came in third as a sitting U.S. senator is, in my opinion, pretty crazy. And, I've been trying to think about it like, okay, what is going on with these, incumbent members who buck the president sometime? And I'm just thinking to myself, well, I feel like we're politicos, so we really, try to pay attention to this stuff on a day-to-day basis. But honestly, I think most primary voters, most people in the base, don't really have time to really get in the weeds of all the policy, right? It's bread and butter issues. And, the litmus test at the end of the day, I guess now is, who does the president want to be in that position? And, whoever he says, that's how the base is going to vote. And you can see that with Massey, you can see that with Cassidy. And, one thing I want to keep in mind is that, a lot of these members in the Senate and Congress who buck Trump, it's, in my opinion, on a lot of really just high profile issues. Like, their voting record is pretty conservative. But if you buck the president on any of these main huge, newsworthy events like the impeachment trial, if you vote to convict him like Bill Cassidy, that was the death sentence. Like you said earlier, this is the first sitting, Republican senator to lose his primary position in the Trump era. We would have seen this with Mitt Romney had he not elected to not run for re-election, and we wouldn't see this with Tom Tillis in North Carolina if he also agreed that he was going to try and run again. So at the end of the day, it just solidifies the fact that the president does have a huge grip still on the Republican base. Whether that translates to, I guess, general election electability is kind of on the back burner, as a lot of especially Senate Republicans are pretty stressed about Paxton beating out Cornyn. But that's the way it is. And that's just kind of now Republicans are just going to have to deal with that. There's really no other alternative from Massey on the far right versus an establishment Republican like Cassidy. So that's where we're at right now, and I'm just shocked at how badly they all did, in my honest opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. I feel like, letting Bill Cassidy aside, if you look at the other 2 candidates in Louisiana, Julia and John, like John Fleming, he was part of Trump's administration. So what was interesting to me is he served in the Trump administration. He actually finished off as deputy chief of staff. And he's been a Trump supporter since the very start. And so what I don't understand is why John Fleming over Julia Letlow, right? I understand why President Trump didn't like Cassidy, but the differential there is what I was trying to understand, and like why that is. And so for Letlow, like, I think her story that, her husband died of COVID after winning the election. And so like that political story, I think, is something that wins, right? That's something that resonates with voters, and people will feel for that. And I think that's how she won. And she's been able to do a lot since she's been in office. I liked that she introduced, I think, the Parents' Bill of Rights Act. That was a huge success, and actually was passed into law. And honestly, she hasn't had a lot of major controversies either. I feel like one thing that I saw was maybe she spoke about DEI a little bit differently during her time in academia versus like now. But honestly, DEI has been such an evolving topic. I can't really judge her solely off of that. So yeah, I mean, like, I am a little confused about that. And the other thing is also Fleming, he does have a strong record. And so with that too, like if you look at the fact that I think from a fundraising perspective, he actually, I think, had to loan himself $2 million just to keep going. Like he wasn't able to raise any traction with anybody who wanted to donate, versus Julia Letlow, she was able to get grassroots funding. And so I think from an electability perspective, that's probably where Trump was thinking. But yeah, Eric, to echo your point, I think, if you're not in line with Trump and, his administration, I think you're definitely going to see that in the primaries.
Well, honestly, I think it kind of flips the normal political calculus, especially in the Trump era now, because I feel like in the past, right, it's, when you go to Senate, you're supposed to, I feel like traditionally have a track record of public service, right? You either start in the state legislature, governor, or maybe a U.S. House seat. I feel like with Letlow, since she's not a true political novice, but she hasn't been in Congress for, an extended period of time, right? She's pretty new at the role. And I feel like, the president is able to basically say, what, hey, if I can get you to the Senate, you de facto kind of owe me your political career. So essentially, all of the bills, all the policy, all the judicial nominations that I want to get through, you kind of owe me that on the back burner. I wouldn't say that they're saying this out loud, but
100%.
Go with someone who is more established, right? They kind of have a political career prior to the president, which can be compromising if the president's goals differ from their individual goals. I don't think this is going to play effect at all in the general. I think this is a safe red seat. I don't see any problem. I think Letlow will vote as conservative as Bill Cassidy, even maybe more conservative on certain issues, especially vaccines and health issues. I know Bill Cassidy as a doctor was actually critical, like Armand said, of RFK during the confirmation hearings. But if I could pick, kind of decipher why Letlow, it's probably because, she doesn't have a long track record of prior experience and prior commitments that now it's solely based off of the president's endorsement. How that carries forward in her career in the Senate after Trump remains to be seen. But if I was going to, decipher it or pick a reason for it, that's probably what I would go with.
Yeah. I mean, she honestly doesn't seem like a bad candidate. She's the first woman senator from Louisiana, so clearly she's doing something right. I mean, it's clearly like she's kind of following Trump's movement a little bit, but she's actively worked on education and kids issues. She sits on appropriations. Hopefully if she is elected, she votes her conscience, and we have no issues there.
Yeah, as a Republican conservative, I don't have any issues with her either. I think she's totally fine on the issues. I haven't really seen anything that would make me question her commitments.
And to be honest, I was just going to say, I think, Bill Cassidy's been in Congress for so long anyway, maybe it's time for a fresher face to take on Louisiana government.
Change.
Like, we want change anyway, so it can't be the worst.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem with Bill Cassidy was that he voted for impeachment. And, the fact that he was voted out is clearly an indication of the fact that January 6th didn't mean much to the Republican Party, specifically those in Louisiana, which is an interesting statement,
Well,
neither here nor there, but like
I think it's
something to think about.
President isn't, convicted for inciting a riot, which I think there's enough evidence to indicate that it might be unsavory to you as far as rhetoric, but actual legal standard I don't think matches it. But hey, I wasn't in the Senate, but I guess Bill Cassidy disagrees with me. But now he's out of office, so it doesn't matter.
That's what matters. Yeah. All right, so I think we can move on to Kentucky. Kentucky on Tuesday, 7-term Republican Thomas Massey lost the Republican primary in Kentucky's 4th congressional district to Trump-endorsed Ed Gallerin, a farmer and retired Navy SEAL. The Associated Press called the race less than 2 hours after polls closed, with Massey trailing by roughly 9 points. According to Ad Impact, more than $32 million was spent on advertising in the race, making it the most expensive U.S. House primary on record. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth traveled to the district the day before the election to campaign for Gallerin, his office said. He attended in a personal capacity. Massey has represented the district since 2012. He was one of the 2 House Republicans, no votes on the One Big Beautiful Bill, opposed U.S. military operations in Iran and Venezuela, and led the bipartisan effort to force release of the Jeffrey Epstein's files. Massey has said he voted with Trump approximately 90% of the time. Thoughts, Eric and Adarsh?
Yeah, well, is it going to come back to bite me if I say I'm not slightly disappointed that Thomas Massey lost his primary? I mean, you brought up some good points. He also voted against the CARES Act during the first Trump administration, and I think he's repeatedly voted against any of the continuing resolutions for the budget bills in the House. So, I mean, look, Thomas Massey, in my opinion, is very principled to a fault if you care about your political career. And we can see that now because he is no longer going to be a member of the House of Representatives. I give him a lot of credit for basically releasing the Epstein files. To this day, I do not understand why the administration was so against releasing these up front. And I'm assuming it's because there's mention of the president in the Epstein files, but it doesn't confirm that he acted in an illegal way or was, participating in Epstein's sex trafficking ring. At the end of the day, it just trying to get them not released just actually makes it seem like you are guilty. So I really think this was a huge miscalculation, and I give Rokan and Massey a ton of credit because at the end of the day, right, as this brand of conservatism is supposed to be, we want to fight back against the deep state. Well, I can't think of any other policy that is supposed to be the smoking gun than releasing evidence on, elites participating in a child sex ring over decades. I think that would be pretty obvious you want to release that to the public to kind of expose them. So I give him a lot of credit. I am disappointed. If you look at just the spending, like you said, this is the most expensive House race or a primary race in history, which is nuts. This is a little district in Kentucky. And you know who's funding it? It's AIPAC and the Israel lobby. And this has been a recurring issue that the right and the left are grappling with. And, well, for better or for worse, they won out with their candidate in Ed Galbraith. And this is just a continuing problem. And it basically goes to show if you want to criticize the government of Israel, there's going to be repercussions on your political career through the tune of millions of dollars to unseat you. So,
just criticizing the government of Israel? No, criticizing Donald Trump. Massey was not a moderate in any sense. He was extremely pro-gun, anti-spending, anti-deficit, anti-regulation. He was a libertarian. He was anti-interventionist. He was a true Republican with ideals. You said it yourself.
Yeah, he was too principled, and he was critical of the president.
It's not a loss in... So his loss is not moderates beating conservatives. It's loyalty politics, defeating ideological conservatism.
Yeah, the argument I keep hearing from the right is he was actually just a grifter and an obstructionist. I'm like, okay, well, wait, we actually want to have the legislature be a co-equal branch of the executive. We want them to kind of keep the administration in line when they're clearly not delivering on the promises, right, of fiscal discipline, transparency, no new wars, non-interventionism. I'm still trying to reconcile how that makes sense, but I mean, it's a good thing I'm not running for office because that would be a huge, huge challenge to put it in the least, complicated way possible. So I don't know if you agree with me on that, though.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Massey's loss is low-key. It's a pretty tough loss for the Republicans. I feel like he was, like you said, he was willing to push back. He did that against, even internal agencies, and he did a very commendable effort there. He was a constitutionalist who was willing to work across the aisle to get stuff done, and I feel like that's honestly become more and more important these days. And, relative to, Ed Galbraith, 90% of his donors were individual small donors. I think, honestly, AIPAC is just a concept I just don't understand, quite frankly. They have their, Super PAC United Democracy Project that just spends tens of millions of dollars on media campaigns. And I was looking into them. Apparently, 95% of the money from that Super PAC has only been spent on primary campaigns, which is, absolutely insane. In 2024, AIPAC endorsed 362 candidates, won every single primary they had a candidate on the ballot for, which is actually insane. So, honestly, my view on this is pretty simple. I feel like if there's a political machine like AIPAC that exists like this, primarily to enforce another country's agenda, that should honestly be illegal, or at least heavily constrained, regardless of what country it is. Like, I don't care if it's Israel or England or, Germany, whatever. Like, people might make the arguments that, like, interest group exists, and sure, that's true. Like, unions, business group, environmental groups, like, those all exist. The difference here is those groups are, like, rooted in domestic constituencies. They're not foreign interests. And I feel like this is, like, a very foreign policy first kind of outfit that has been spending money on both parties, like you said, too. And I think tying that in with the fact that this was such an expensive House primary when we already have probably a pretty upward battle for the midterms in general seems pretty crazy to me.
Yeah, just to explain your point a little bit, I believe since AIPAC is run and registered by members of the U.S., like U.S. citizens, they don't technically have to register as a foreign lobbying entity. And this is like the whole, debate right now in Congress is, should we have AIPAC register as a foreign lobbying entity? Because clearly their interests are very much identical to the interests of the Israeli government. And look, I think there is a clear difference between criticizing the Israeli government and being anti-Semitic, because this is the number one thing you're going to run into if you criticize the Israeli government is you're being anti-Semitic. Why is this the only time that, charge works when you criticize any type of government, right? I mean, if I criticize the US government, does that mean I'm anti-American? It doesn't make, it's like the only time we ignore their rationality. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I definitely think they should be registering as a foreign lobbying entity, because the interests of Israel do not always align with the US, right? They might sometimes when you're trying to counter Iran, but not all the times. And that's really important. And this just reinforces how powerful that lobby is. And it's just kind of, do with that information, what you will. So I'm going to stop talking about that.
Yeah, no disagreement here. I think it once again showcases that an example of how when Trump endorses somebody, what the outcomes are when the Israeli government and the politicians that align with AIPAC endorse somebody, what the outcomes are. And I mean, just once again, $32 million spent on a primary is a lot of money, especially in a district in Kentucky. So
yeah,
nothing more to say there.
Add to what you said is, I'm just again like shocked because Bill Cassidy, look, I get it. You might not, a lot of people don't really even know their senator, like whatever. I'm not surprised that he lost. I'm surprised he came in third, but that's besides the point. The fact that Thomas Massey is such a high profile conservative and such a high profile member of the House, he's been in the House for many years. The fact that he lost by 10 percentage points is insane to me. I was shocked that he lost by that much. I mean, this guy is, you would think he's kind of a local legend, right? This is kind of Kentucky's, claim to fame from the House, right? You have Mitch McConnell and you have Rand Paul in the Senate, but other than that, the only one putting Kentucky on the map as far as national politics is Thomas Massey. And the fact that he lost by 10% is it just goes to show, right? I feel like most voters are only concerned with, what the president's endorsement is. And that's not a knock on the average voter, because most people don't have time to deal with all of these issues and get into the weeds, right? You have other things that are way more important, that are way more immediate for your family and your well-being. So I totally get it. But it just goes to show again, right, how important is the president's endorsement, and it's the number one thing. You could be.
Let's rephrase how important this president's endorsement is, which showcases a difference in normal politics, in awareness and in thought-provoking politics to loyalty politics, which is something that's much newer in this day and age. But we can move forward.
The average Republican trust the president. I mean, you might not.
You might
not agree with
the
that.
Average Republican for sure. The average
conservative voter in the primary trusts the president. That's how it is.
I mean, let's check. Let
me draw a comparison here that might be a little unheard of, but if you go back to the 1930s, let's go back to FDR. He's at the height of his power. He's built the New Deal, and he honestly did pretty much the same thing. He was pretty upset that some of the conservative Democrats in his own party were dragging their feet on his agenda. So what does he start doing? He starts purging them. Like Trump, he starts backing primary challengers against incumbents. And honestly, in the short term, it worked. He purged the dissenters. Some of the parties got in line. But in a long term, I think the historical verdict is that FDR's purge mostly failed. A lot of the incumbents he targeted honestly ended up surviving. He created a ton of bad blood inside his own party. The difference here with Trump, though, is he's actually having like we said, like a tremendous amount of success with the primary backers he's had so far. And there's honestly been no signs of letting up. It seems like it's going to probably continue in Texas, although I feel like that might be a little bit more contested. But, you know, he's kind of doing the same thing where, you know, he's trying to remake the image of the party. He's not just content in leading, he wants to remake it in his own image.
I think FDR and Trump are slightly different. Yes, FDR was
he did the same thing.
Had emotional voter
coalitions,
and he did rally people against loyalty, but FDR's coalition was much more policy driven. It was focused on Social Security, on labor protections, on banking reform, on economic intervention. Trump's coalition, it's not like that. It's cultural, it's populist, it's identity based. You said it.
Well, you guys created identity politics. Let's remember that.
You said it yourself, right? The Massey is a true conservative at heart, and he voted against Trump a couple times. 90% of the time he didn't. But because Trump didn't say Trump wasn't accepting of him and Trump endorsed somebody else, it didn't go his way. And so there's a very, very big difference between FDR and Trump. And the answer is within loyalty. It's not within within politics at all, or within policy.
Hold on. If we just take the president at face value and we just agree, I know you're going to disagree with what I'm going to say, but for the sake of the argument, if the president believes that there are certain policy goals he has to accomplish, like truly, truly believes that, you cannot have, you know, dissenters in your party, because that's going, especially with such a slim majority, that's going to hold stuff up. And we've seen that play out in real time. So, I mean, it is his prerogative, and I don't blame him. If I really, really believed that these things were in the benefit of the country, I would take the action necessary to purge these members and get a coalition together that is going to pass my agenda. So, I mean, you are going to disagree with that premise, but if we take it as true, I don't blame him at all. I don't think you can blame him either. And we can't blame FDR. I mean, these things happen.
I'm not blaming FDR, but what I think is the key thing here is the sense of true belief from Trump's perspective. And I think that, sure, I do believe that Trump believes he's doing everything right in his power to support the country. The question is, the American people, are they willing to accept that, or are they willing to challenge that? FDR was able to accept dissent. Trump has not ever been able to accept dissent.
I mean, they really tried to pack the Supreme Court when they voted against the New Deal programs. So you want to talk about accepting dissent? They tried to pack the court to add more people to subvert the will of the court. So
I think there's a lot more parallels than we think.
You need to admit there are a lot more parallels than you think.
Yeah, there are a lot more parallels than you think. Yeah, and also the New Deal agenda at the time.
I'm saying it's different because FDR was much more policy driven than Trump is, and that the primary showcase it themselves. Trump is a loyalty politician. He's not focused on policy. He's not focused on what really matters to the American people as much as focused on what he believes.
Policy, by definition, is you're going to have more limited policy. So you will never have as much policy as a liberal like FDR. So I don't even consider that to be valid.
I also think like the New Deal, like related acts that he was passing at the time were also considered like pretty major and revolutionary things. And you could make the argument that any sort of policy that Trump is also trying to pass is being considered in the same way. If not, it's being even more further hyperpolarized due to media right now, right? So I think, you know, from that perspective, I also think you have to think about the fact that he is the president of the United States, but he's also the leader of the GOP, right? And from that perspective, I think he does have the right to have some sort of say. Now, do I agree with that? Not necessarily. Like, I think it's a good idea for honestly any sort of president to just take a step back from being so involved with primary races. I just don't think there's any need to, you know, have this federal level of like micromanagement of primaries. That's just not needed. And honestly, like, especially when it's starting to look more like revenge than strategy, I do think that.
Period. Done.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I can agree with that. But I can agree with that.
You made me win, dude. That's it. Period.
There's no winning. There's no winning. We might still clobber you in the midterms. Yeah, we might still clobber you.
Fundamentally, that's the problem. The problem is the president is getting involved in things for absolutely no reason than benefit for himself. Pure benefit for himself. And
himself and his agenda. That's the thing you keep forgetting.
Yeah,
his
himself
agenda.
and his agenda.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
but what is
Which is
his
what
agenda?
Republicans do want,
who
right?
is his agenda really helping? Who is his agenda really helping? That's the
Well,
real
right.
question.
Goal is for it to help the American people. I mean, that's every
I mean,
president's goal.
inshallah, bro. I hope so, but I don't think that's gonna happen.
You're going to disagree with whether that's good or not for as far as policy goes, but it's his agenda. I don't blame him at all for wanting him to get more people in line if they're, dissidents. I mean, obviously, I wish there was more little qualification when it comes to the individual, but by and large, yeah, it's his prerogative to do that.
Sure, it's also everybody's prerogative to do whatever the fuck they want. That doesn't mean that like you're supposed to like just do that, right?
Well,
I mean, of course,
I wouldn't say it's his prerogative to pack the Supreme Court. I wouldn't say that. But your guy apparently does think it's his prerogative.
my guy. Who's my guy?
Your guy FDR, you love to keep talking about.
Oh, of course, because I brought up FDR. Let's remember who brought up FDR.
I mean, he is an idol for the Democrats, though. You can't
You're gonna
forget
tell me he's
that.
not your idol? That's like
Let's
the
just
main guy
remember.
of like New Democrats.
He's probably like R. Reagan. He's R. Reagan.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, with that, we'll move on to Texas, our last conversation. Also on Tuesday, President Trump endorsed Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton over four-term Senator John Cornyn in the Republican U.S. Senate primary runoff, 1 week before the May 26th election. And with early voting already underway, Cornyn finished first in the March 3rd primary and Paxton second. Neither cleared 50%, sending the race to a runoff. Cornyn has stated he voted with Trump more than 99% of the time. Senate Republican leadership had spent months publicly lobbying Trump to back Cornyn. The winner of the runoff will face a Democratic nominee, James Tallarico, in November. In April, polling showed Tallarico led both Cornyn and Paxton in hypothetical matchups, though Cook Political Report still rates the seat likely Republican. No Democrat has won a statewide race in Texas since 1944. Thoughts?
I mean, this one honestly makes less sense than the others, to be honest. I feel like you said, his voting record has been pretty consistent. I honestly think the primary reason Trump doesn't like him here is because he was pretty slow to embrace his return in 2024. I think he may have even made some comments like before that where he was like, oh, I think we need someone who might actually win or something like that. I'm sure that rubbed Trump's...
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that. And I'm sure that rubbed Trump the wrong way. And the other,
and like, that's how we should run this country. How do we rub our president the right or wrong way, right?
I listen, I can't, the Texas race, I can't even defend because the contender that he is endorsing, Paxton, like he comes with so much baggage and scandals and legal issues that I don't even know where to begin with that. I mean, he had securities fraud, I think, in 2015. He had another FBI investigation for like bribery and abuse of power. He was impeached as Texas AG. I think the Senate acquitted him though, but still. And the cherry on top, he was cheating throughout his entire marriage. And I think his wife is divorcing him now. So I just don't. Yeah. So I just don't. I don't. This one is definitely very, very confusing. And clearly, I think if you want to make a case for, loyalist politics, this is probably the strongest. And I also think the one thing I do kind of worry about this is I feel like Democrats have been actively kind of happy about this endorsement because they think Paxton could actually be like an easier candidate to defeat in the general, which I 100% agree with. So I'm very curious to see how the primary goes on Tuesday. But yeah, I think this one is definitely not one that I support.
Yeah, well, if you were worried about 2018 when Beto O'Rourke nearly beat Ted Cruz, I would be way more worried about it now because I think James Tallarico has a way better shot of beating Ken Paxton as it is. Even if Ken Paxton was an incumbent like Ted Cruz, I don't even think it matters. I think, like you said, there is so much baggage with Ken Paxton that, I mean, I understand where the Senate Republicans were basically like, you need to get on board with John Cornyn because there is a very serious chance that James Tallarico becomes the first Democratic senator in over 20 years. I mean, you mentioned securities fraud, right? That's just the tip of the iceberg. He settled that with I believe it was the plaintiffs for, I believe it was $6.6 million. By the way, I think the AG's office, so the state taxpayers are actually on the, they're on the hook for paying that.
Perfect.
And
Perfect.
yeah, the whole quid pro quo with the Texas developer, real estate developer, to basically he has access to the Attorney General office. There was a bunch of whistleblowers from the AG's office working with Ken Paxton. These are, conservatives, right? Deputy attorney generals who whistleblow that, hey, you're kind of using an abuse of power from your office in an unofficial capacity. Ken Paxton fired all of these people, and under the Texas Whistleblowers Act, now this whole thing was fought out in court. And like you mentioned, right, he was cheating on his wife the whole time with, I believe it was a member of the state Senate, a state Senate staffer. And what's actually even more interesting is that the real estate developer was hired his mistress onto his staff, created a fake Uber account, and basically allowed Ken Paxton to use this Uber account to travel to and from his office to her apartment. And that was going on
Perfect.
for a few years. So Angela Paxton, his former ex-wife, I believe now, I think they're officially divorced. She recused herself from the Senate trial. So, I mean, look, in a primary, is this going to matter? No. To the hardcore base, is this going to matter? No. To the suburban mom in Houston and Austin who really cares about these, optics, is this going to matter? Yes. On the issues, James Tallarico is still very liberal. Do not get it twisted. He is still a Democrat. And would, in my opinion, vote just like any of the Democrats in the other swing states like Raphael Warnock, John Ossoff from Georgia. But the fact that he can mask this in a very, calm demeanor, kind of, I'm just your average guy, average Texan. I'm not a politician, whatnot. I used to be a school teacher, whatnot. That is very effective to the general electorate. And like I said, I could see this easily going towards James Tallarico. And the last thing I want to mention is, you want to know why Ken Paxton is popular? Well, not only is he super, super MAGA, but he was also the first attorney general to file the Texas v. Pennsylvania lawsuit, which challenged the authenticity of the 2020 election, which made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, where the court basically said you don't have standing. Texas, their own solicitor general, refused to put his name on this brief because he didn't believe it had any value. So read, like I said, what does that show? It shows Ken Paxton is willing to do whatever the president believes. And yeah, that's how you win a primary. But I'm not sure if that's how you win a general election, though. No one can say
I
it better.
100% agree with that.
No one can say it better. I mean, that's just what it is,
I mean, we can close out on that. This week's podcast really centered around one major theme: the Republican Party's transformation into a loyalty-driven political movement. Across all three of the major races, Louisiana, Kentucky, and Texas, the defining issue often wasn't ideology, policy, or even electability, as Eric said himself. It was alignment with Donald Trump. In Louisiana, Bill Cassidy, a conservative senator who voted with Republicans most of the time, lost years after voting to convict Trump following January 6th. In Kentucky, Thomas Massey, one of the most ideologically conservative members of Congress, lost despite voting with Trump roughly 90% of the time, largely because he opposed Trump-backed priorities on spending and foreign policy. And in Texas, John Cornyn, who voted with Trump over 99% of the time, was still passed over in favor of Ken Paxton because Trump viewed Paxton as more personally loyal. Together, these races suggest that today's GOP party is becoming less about traditional conservatism and more about allegiance, identity, and alignment with Trump specifically. The bigger question we explored is whether this makes Republicans stronger through unity or weaker by prioritizing loyalty over broader electability. Any last thoughts, Eric and Adarsh?
Yeah, I want to ask you both. Right now, your election prediction for Texas. Do you think if it's Tallarico versus Paxton, who do you think wins right now?
One word answers.
Yeah.
Adarsh, go first.
I don't want to say it, but I think it's going Tallarico. I think
agree.
it will.
I'm all in for Tallarico.
There's early polling data that already shows that.
Of O'Rourke or anything like that, but I'm a supporter of Tallarico. I think he can do it.
I think if the national environment does not improve, then I think it will be Tallarico. If not, I think Paxton might win by 3.
Wait, I thought we supported the national environment. I thought we support Donald J. Trump.
You've recorded every single video with me so far. You know that I have addressed the fact that we need to bring back our topic on bread and butter issues, and that the administration needs to address those quickly. So I don't want you saying that I'm some kind of grifter saying that it's perfect, because it's definitely not.
It's not about perfection. It's just, are we okay with what's going on right now? And do we support future folks following in line, being loyalists, rather than thinking with their own brains? That's all I gotta say.
Sometimes to get things done, you need people on your side. And Trump is just trying to get things done.
What things do we want to get done?
You'll find out. You'll find out after the midterms. You'll find out after the midterms. You gotta let these guys take office first, and then they'll actually start to pass legislation, because that's what Republicans do.
Exactly.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And honestly, maybe the environment might get better with the whole war powers thing. Maybe the war does come to an end.
Bill Cassidy actually voted now to invoke the war powers finally. So
so that makes sense.
It's better voting no, but we'll see what happens, right?
Yeah.
All right. With that, thank you, everyone. See you next week.